Deep within the great Luo heaven, a sweeping wave of light and shadow surged from all directions, eventually descending in a breathtaking display, occupying every inch of the vast plaza that had been cleared atop a massive peak. The great Luo heaven domain had clearly undergone earth-shattering changes over the past year, with powerful forces now gathered under its banner. The scale of this power was unrivaled, even in the entire northern domain. At this moment, the enormous plaza was the focal point for countless strong figures from across the great Luo heaven domain. Every royal assembly heralded the birth of a new king, and only those who became kings could establish their own factions and gain access to more resources provided by the domain. As such, the competition for the title of king was fierce. With countless strong individuals coveting the position. It was evident that the struggle for the throne in the great Luo heaven domain had become far more intense than it was a year ago. In the past, anyone at the 5th grade supreme level had a chance at competing for the throne, but now, without reaching the 7th grade supreme, most would hesitate to even try. This change over the past year demonstrated just how much the great Luo heaven domain had transformed. The massive plaza was filled with the sounds of bustling voices, and occasionally, waves of light and shadow would streak across the distant sky. Far outshining ordinary figures, these spectacles always attracted envious glances from those gathered, as only those who commanded their own forces, the kings, could travel with such a dramatic display. These lights and shadows fell directly to the central area of the plaza, where the core of the great Luo heaven domain lay. Countless gazes converged on this central region. The most eye-catching feature was a golden throne at the top of a stone staircase. The throne exuded an air of mysterious authority, and even though it merely stood still, it inspired awe in the eyes of countless powerful individuals in the plaza. This throne belonged to the domain lord of the great Luo heaven, currently the strongest figure in the northern domain. Beneath the golden throne were 3 silver thrones, equally striking under the sunlight. Sitting on these thrones were 3 individuals, their eyes half closed and expressions calm as they accepted the admiring and respectful gazes from all around. These 3 were the 3 emperors who had stood alongside Mandala in establishing the great Luo heaven domain: the sleeping king, the heavenly vulture emperor, and the spirit pupil emperor. Beneath the 3 emperors were numerous stone thrones, where powerful figures sat chatting and laughing. These individuals, each exuding formidable spiritual energy, were the current kings of the great Luo heaven domain. Among these kings, the ones who caught the most attention were, unexpectedly, not the usual dominant figures like the Xun'er king or the mountain-splitting king. Instead, it was the 2 figures at the very front. These 2 individuals sat at the head of the kings. The person on the left had an old, withered face, and his body appeared as if it were a dying tree. His eyes were slightly lowered, and his posture seemed weak, yet he radiated an oppressive aura that sent chills down one's spine. This individual was known as the Withered Elder, a once powerful figure in the northern domain before joining the great Luo heaven domain. To the right of the Withered Elder sat a towering, muscular middle-aged man whose shadow was large enough to cover the Withered Elder. His arms were notably thick, seemingly several times larger than those of an ordinary person. His broad hands hung casually by his side. But anyone who observed closely would hear a faint sound of sonic booms whenever he moved his fingers, as if every motion contained the destructive force to shatter mountains. This person was known as Dragon Arm Supreme, a former top-tier powerhouse. In the northern domain. It was said that he had cultivated a special technique that implanted a pair of dragon arms into his body, transforming them into his own limbs, granting him strength comparable to that of the Dragon Clan. Both of these individuals had reached the 9th grade supreme level, far surpassing the other kings of the great Luo heaven domain. Even the mighty Xun'er king, once the strongest among the kings, could only take a backseat to them. However, neither of these 2 seemed particularly interested in the position of king. As they chatted with each other, their occasional glances toward the 3 figures seated on the silver thrones revealed a trace of provocation and defiance in their eyes, as if they were ready to challenge them at any moment. To both of them, whether in strength or fame, they felt they were no less than the 3 sovereigns of the great Luo heaven domain. Among the 3 sovereigns, aside from the always half-asleep sleeping king, who made them feel a sense of caution, the heavenly vulture king and spirit pupil emperor were seen as equals. With such power, naturally, they desired positions that matched their strength. And this position was undoubtedly the emperor of the great Luo heaven domain. Upon the silver platform, the heavenly vulture king and spirit pupil emperor sensed the 2 gazes carrying a hint of provocation, though their expressions remained calm. They both silently snorted in their hearts. As veteran ministers of the Great Luo Heaven Domain, they had naturally noticed the fierce competition over the past year, with even their positions now being eyed by others. However, they couldn't dismiss the challengers' qualifications, as the reputation of both the Withered Elder and Dragon Arm Supreme surpassed theirs, if not equaling them. In fact, if not for the immense resources granted by the Domain Lord this past year, helping them break through their bottlenecks and achieving breakthroughs to the 9th grade Supreme, they might have already been surpassed by these ambitious newcomers. The conflict between the old and new ministers of the Great Luo Heaven Domain was gradually spilling into their level. These two seemed determined to claim the position of new emperor, the Spirit Pupil Emperor said, glancing at the two figures, then subtly moved his lips, sending a voice transmission to the Heavenly Vulture King. Previously, the Heavenly Vulture King and Spirit Pupil Emperor had some disputes and weren't particularly close, but as more powerful newcomers joined the Great Luo Heaven Domain, these disputes had mostly dissipated, and there was even some sense of mutual defense between the two. Upon hearing the Spirit Pupil Emperor's message, the Heavenly Vulture King slightly nodded and replied, "These two are strong enough and have gradually gained a foothold. It seems they'll get their way this time." Upon saying this, the Heavenly Vulture King grimaced slightly. Given the personalities of Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, if either became the new emperor, their rivalry would only intensify. Hee, what does Brother Meng think? The Spirit Pupil Emperor's eyes flickered slightly as he looked toward the half-asleep Sleeping King. He and the Heavenly Vulture King had not tried to conceal their conversation from the Sleeping King, clearly unbothered by him overhearing. Despite having recently advanced to the 9th grade Supreme, the Spirit Pupil Emperor remained courteous toward the Sleeping King, knowing that the Sleeping King had followed the Domain Lord for many years and was the most loyal. If the Domain Lord had any thoughts on the matter, the Sleeping King would likely know something about it. The Sleeping King, seemingly pretending to nap, opened his eyes slightly at the Spirit Pupil Emperor's words and casually smiled. The Domain Lord believes that the position of new emperor should have 2 seats. The Spirit Pupil Emperor and the Heavenly Vulture King were both taken aback and then shook their heads helplessly. "Well, that seems to favor these two," they murmured. Previously, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder had attempted to contend for the position of new emperor but were rejected by Mandala, as this position was too important. At that time, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder lacked the qualifications and loyalty needed to match it. However, seeing the current situation, it seemed that Mandala might be starting to relent, and thus, the matter of appointing the emperor might soon be settled. The two sighed. They had fought alongside the Domain Lord for years to reach their current status, yet now these two newcomers, who had been in the Great Luo Heaven Domain for less than a year and hadn't done anything extraordinary, were about to stand on equal footing with them. Naturally, they felt somewhat uncomfortable. The reason told them that, with the strength of Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, they certainly qualified for the position. The Sleeping King opened his eyes slightly, his drowsy gaze seeming to glance toward where Dragon Arm Supreme and the others were. He then faintly smiled. The Domain Lord only mentioned opening 2 new emperor positions, but never said they would be them. Upon hearing this, the Spirit Pupil Emperor and the Heavenly Vulture King were stunned, feeling somewhat confused. Looking across the entire Great Luo Heaven Domain, the only ones qualified to contend for the new emperor position seemed to be Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. Was the Domain Lord planning to have the Xun'er King take the position? If so, that would undoubtedly provoke dissatisfaction from Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, as the Xun'er King's 8th grade supreme strength wasn't enough to win everyone over. The Spirit Pupil Emperor and the Heavenly Vulture King exchanged glances, preparing to inquire further, but the Sleeping King had already closed his eyes again, looking as though he had fallen back into a deep sleep. With his heavy sleep-like demeanor, the two could only shake their heads helplessly. Boom! A deep, ancient bell tone suddenly echoed across the heavens and earth. The once boiling square instantly fell silent as countless figures revealed expressions of awe. Even Dragon Arm Supreme and Withered Elder slightly lowered their heads, their faces filled with reverence that a streak of radiance seemed to pierce through space itself, finally coalescing on the resplendent golden throne at the center of the square. That a petite figure, clad in black robes, emerged from the light. Her golden eyes swept across the crowd with an indifferent gaze, and wherever her eyes passed, an overwhelming pressure surged forth. Even powerhouses like Dragon Arm Supreme and the others felt their spiritual energy momentarily stagnate within them, their hearts filled with silent terror. This was the power of an upper earth supreme. Just a single glance was enough to render them utterly powerless. Mandala's gaze flickered briefly before she waved her delicate hand. Her voice, soft yet carrying an undeniable authority, resonated across the square and ignited the atmosphere in an instant. The King's Assembly begins. With those simple words, the atmosphere of the King's Assembly was set ablaze. Countless powerful figures had eyes burning red with fervor, especially those vying for the title of king within the great Luo heaven domain. Their breathing grew heavy. At this moment, nothing could stop them from charging forward, no matter who stood in their way. The battle for the king's position in the great Luo heaven domain had evolved beyond its past traditions. It no longer was selection determined solely through arena challenges. Now, candidates also required the nomination of at least 5 reigning kings. Of course, the most crucial factor remained: how many king positions Mandala would grant this time. With the great Luo heaven domain teeming with formidable individuals, the number of available king titles was far too limited. However, granting too many titles would inevitably lead to internal conflicts among the domain's powerhouses. A single misstep could even spark civil strife. Thus, Mandala always kept a tight grip on the number of kings appointed. This time, she had chosen to offer only 5 positions. Yet, the number of contenders eyeing those 5 seats was in the dozens, making for an elimination rate that was nothing short of brutal. So, the moment Mandala casually waved her hand, a torrential surge of spiritual energy erupted across the heavens and earth. Dozens of figures shot out simultaneously, each landing upon one of the massive stone platforms scattered across the square. Roar. Deafening cries and battle shouts rang through the air as the supporters of these candidates erupted in frenzied cheers. After all, if their chosen champion claimed victory and ascended to the rank of king, they too would reap the benefits. The merit of support would grant them a stake in future faction establishments, ensuring access to valuable resources that would accelerate their cultivation. Seated atop the golden throne, Mandala merely cast a brief, indifferent glance at the chaos before. Shutting her golden eyes, feigning sleep, to her, these battles were hardly worth watching, if not for the ever-growing strength of the great Luo heaven domain. She would have left these matters, as before, in the hands of the 3 sovereigns. Moreover, she had not come today merely to witness the battle for these 5 king positions. Her gaze subtly shifted to Dragon Arm Supreme and Withered Elder below. The 2 of them appeared perfectly at ease, their demeanor exuding confidence, as if they had already secured the title of new emperor. In their eyes, the so-called kings of the domain were insignificant, incapable of posing any challenge to their claim. Their arrogance brought an almost imperceptible smirk to Mandala's lips. Their strength was indeed formidable, but they were too proud. If she allowed them to become the new emperor too quickly, it might not be in the best interest of the great Luo heaven domain. The battles raging across the square were intense, but they did not last long. The disparities in strength among the contenders were evident. After roughly an hour of fierce combat, only 5 stone platforms remained occupied by 5 standing figures. Each of these 5 exuded an extraordinary aura, with powerful spiritual energy fluctuations surging around them. All 5 had already stepped into the realm of the 8th grade supreme, placing their strength on par with Bai Ming, whom Chen had encountered in the Divine Beast Plains. These 5 were undoubtedly the most outstanding among the new kings. Mandala looked at the 5 figures and nodded slightly. With the rapid expansion of the great Luo heaven domain, even the quality of those seeking refuge had improved significantly. After all, the allure of the domain now far surpassed what it had been in the past. Therefore, the strength of these new kings is generally formidable, except for the 2 old kings, Xun'er King and Mountain Splitting King. The rest of them still hover around the 7th grade supreme realm, unable to step into the 8th grade. This is likely the source of the current conflict between the new and old forces. The old kings pride themselves on their seniority, while the new kings boast overwhelming strength, leading to continuous friction. However, Mandala has not intervened, as such conflicts do not harm the great Luo heaven domain. The birth of the 5 kings immediately stirred up a thunderous cheer from the crowd, shaking the atmosphere to its peak. The three sovereigns rose and announced the emergence of the 5 new kings and their respective factions. Afterward, the 5 kings withdrew, but as they left, the atmosphere in the square did not wane. Instead, it grew even more intense and fiery. Countless gazes swept across the sky, landing on the 2 figures sitting on stone thrones in the center of the square. Everyone knew that the true focus of this king's meeting was not the competition among the new kings, but the appearance of the new emperor. Looking across the entire Great Luo Heaven domain, there were over 20 kings, but only 3 emperors. Normally, when the domain lords enter seclusion, the entire Great Luo Heaven domain is effectively controlled by the 3 emperors, highlighting the immense power of this position. However, the fight for the throne is on a completely different level than the competition among the kings. Only those who have reached the 9th grade supreme are qualified to contend for the throne. At present, within the Great Luo Heaven domain, aside from Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, no one else meets this qualification. Thus, once Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder ascend, the 3 emperors of the Great Luo Heaven domain will become 5 emperors, and the entire structure will change drastically. Among the kings, some have already begun to quietly calculate that once Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder take the throne, they may need to surrender and seek protection in hopes of gaining favor. As these thoughts ran through the minds of countless people, Mandala's golden eyes slowly opened, and her calm voice echoed throughout the heavens and earth. I hereby declare that the Great Luo Heaven domain will add 2 more imperial positions. Those with the strength will claim them. A stir erupted once again in the heavens and earth, and countless fiery gazes were directed toward the 2 figures at the forefront of the kings. There, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder remained calm, as if not surprised. Once the 2 imperial positions were confirmed, their ascension was inevitable. Behind them, Xun'er King and Mountain-Splitting King sighed helplessly. Originally, they were the most likely to become emperors, but with the rapid expansion of the Great Luo Heaven domain, they had been surpassed and now had to step back. Though dissatisfied, they had no choice. After all, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder's strength was undeniable. Apart from having more seniority, they had no other advantages. Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor exchanged a glance, their faces expressionless. It seemed that the Great Luo Heaven domain would become even more lively from now on, and with these 2 stirring things up, future matters would likely not go as smoothly. Mandala, seated high on her throne, looked down on all below and spoke indifferently. These 2 imperial positions are open to anyone. At this moment, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder rose from their stone thrones and gave a faint smile to the surroundings. We wonder if anyone dares to challenge. If we lose, the new emperor position will be handed over without hesitation. Their words were calm, but their imposing presence was clear, as if they had no doubt that no one would be able to take their positions. Behind them, Xun'er King and others had grim expressions. They exchanged glances but ultimately shook their heads. With their current strength, even if they stepped forward, it would only be embarrassing. The vast square gradually quieted down, but after a long pause, no one spoke. Clearly, everyone knew that Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder were not opponents they could match. Seeing this, a self-satisfied smile spread across Dragon Arm Supreme's rugged face. He chuckled. Since no one dares to challenge, we will. However, just as Dragon Arm Supreme's words were not yet fully spoken, a sudden laugh echoed from the heavens, reverberating throughout the surroundings. Heh, 2 of you. No need to hurry. We are quite interested in this new emperor position. A sudden sound echoed through the air, causing the countless powerful figures in the plaza to freeze in shock. Even figures like the Xun'er King and others were stunned for a moment. They then seemed to sense something and quickly looked up toward the distant sky. There, a vast wave of spiritual light swept across, and soon, numerous shadows appeared in the sky. At the forefront of these shadows stood 2 figures, a man and a woman, both young and strikingly handsome, drawing all eyes to them. The Xun'er King and the others stared blankly at these 2 figures. After a moment, they couldn't help but exclaim, "Mu King, Nine Nether King?" Their voices spread, causing waves of astonished reactions from the crowd. Eyes everywhere turned to look at the 2 figures, and whispers began to spread across the plaza. Is that really Mu King and Nine Nether King, the 2 leaders of Nine Nether Palace? They've been missing for almost a year. I didn't expect them to return. Mu King holds significant power in the Great Luo Heaven domain. It's said that if the domain lord successfully broke through to become an Upper Earth Supreme, Mu King's contributions were essential. Of course, we know that. Otherwise, Nine Nether Palace wouldn't have such status today. This voice was laced with envy, clearly showing extreme jealousy. But what did Mu King say earlier? He and Nine Nether King want to contest for the position of the new emperor. I think he's just a naive young upstart. Even if the domain lord favors him, he's not qualified for the new emperor title. That's true. Mu King actually wants to compete for the throne with Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. That's really a bit far-fetched. Amid the various murmurs, the Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder raised their brows and looked up. They saw Mu Chen and Nine Nether standing with their spiritual energy restrained. The Dragon Arm Supreme then broke into a grin, and soon a mocking laugh rang out across the plaza. I thought it was someone important. Turns out it's the well-known Mu King and Nine Nether King. I already knew of your contributions to the Great Luo Heaven domain. But now, you two want to claim the throne. I can only give you 6 words. Unaware of your own limits. Unaware of your own limits. The Dragon Arm Supreme's casual evaluation echoed through the plaza, drowning out the whispers, and the entire plaza fell into silence. Many gazes were odd, especially from the old veterans of the Great Luo Heaven domain, who looked displeased. Though Dragon Arm Supreme was powerful and famous, Mu Chen had made significant contributions to the domain. Without him, Nine Nether would not have reached the Upper Earth Supreme, and the Divine Hall might have succeeded, leaving the Great Luo Heaven domain without a place in the Northern Realm after the Grand Hunting War. This kind of merit was a debt of gratitude to any true member of the Great Luo Heaven domain. In the past, even the 3 sovereigns would show some respect when dealing with Mu Chen, not belittling him due to his youth. Thus, when they heard Dragon Arm Supreme speak so dismissively of Mu Chen, before Mu Chen could even react, the old kings were already growing unhappy. Dragon Arm Supreme, you may have gained fame early in the Northern Realm, but for us of the Great Luo Heaven domain, you're still a newcomer. You came here because of the power of our domain. But don't forget, Mu Chen's contributions are monumental, said the Xun'er king, who had long been at odds with Dragon Arm Supreme, his voice calm but firm. Everything has its order. Old age doesn't give anyone the right to look down on others. That doesn't work here in the Great Luo Heaven domain, sneered the mountain-splitting king. The other veteran kings, like the Blood Eagle King, immediately agreed. Only the newer kings exchanged looks, not wanting to get involved in the dispute, as it might anger Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. After all, these two would soon be crowned and become the pillars of the Great Luo Heaven domain. Seeing the older kings rebuke them at this moment, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder were taken aback for a moment, and their expressions darkened. They were already well-known powerful figures in the Northern domain, so naturally, they were proud and arrogant. Clearly, they wouldn't be polite to Mu Chen, as they had never truly looked up to him in the first place. After all, he was too young, and although they didn't know exactly how lucky he had been during the Grand Hunting War, where he contributed greatly, the domain lord had been very protective of him. However, they held disdain for this kind of protection gained through connections. When they saw Mu Chen stepping forward, seemingly intending to compete for the new emperor position they had their eyes on, Dragon Arm Supreme immediately rebuked him. But they had clearly underestimated Mu Chen's reputation in the Great Luo Heaven domain. One simple sentence from Dragon Arm Supreme had stirred up a hornet's nest. However, before Dragon Arm Supreme and the others could say anything further, Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor, who were sitting above, spoke up, saying, Mu King and Nine Nether King have contributed greatly to our Great Luo Heaven domain. Neither of you has been officially crowned emperor yet. Your status is comparable to theirs, so we hope you will be more respectful. Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor had long held grievances against Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. Seeing them being attacked from all sides, they didn't hesitate to add fuel to the fire. Even the usually half-asleep sleeping king, upon hearing the rebuke from Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor, smiled and nodded in approval. Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder's faces alternated between pale and green. They never expected that just one sentence would provoke such a fierce reaction. Given their strength and reputation, reprimanding a young junior like Mu Chen would have been completely justified, but they never expected things to escalate this way. They exchanged a glance, their faces dark, and then turned their eyes toward Mandala, seated high on the throne, hoping she would speak up. However, Mandala, still seeming to be in a deep, almost feigned sleep, made no move to stop the others. Seeing Mandala's indifferent attitude, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder's hearts sank. It seemed they had vastly underestimated Mu Chen's abilities. Mandala, in her current state, would rather let them, two ninth-grade Supremes, be attacked by the group than show any sign of support. This clearly indicated that in the Domain Lord's heart, their status might not even compare to Mu Chen's. Realizing this, the two of them felt their faces flush with embarrassment. Though they were extremely dissatisfied, they eventually forced themselves to hold back and looked up at Mu Chen and Nine Nether in midair, forcing a smile and saying, "It seems I overlooked this matter. I hope Mu King won't take it to heart." At this point, even though Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder were deeply frustrated, they had no choice but to back down to avoid further reprimands that would cost them even more face.eye in the sky. Mu Chen observed the situation. Initially shocked by the collective outrage, he then smiled and shook his head. It seemed that the Great Luo Heaven Domain was much more lively and chaotic than before. Although Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder had gotten on his bad side, it was clear that they had long upset many others. This was just the spark that set it all off. Truly unlucky bastards, Mu Chen muttered to himself before smiling and shaking his head, signaling that he wasn't bothered. Then, with a smile, he said, "Since the Domain Lord has said that anyone can challenge for the two new Emperor positions, may I ask if my companion and I are included?" On the throne, Mandala finally opened her golden eyes, glancing at Mu Chen. Golden light swirled around her, and a somewhat playful smile appeared on her delicate face. Although Mu Chen and Nine Nether had masked their spiritual fluctuations with her immense strength, Mandala could easily tell their current power. Yes, she nodded and said. The crowd in the plaza once again erupted in astonishment. This time, even figures like Xun'er King furrowed their brows. They hadn't expected Mu Chen and Nine Nether to actually be serious about competing for the two new Emperor positions against Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, but Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder were formidable 9th-grade Supremes. Even Heavenly Vulture Emperor and Spirit Pupil Emperor were only comparable in strength. They knew that. Mu Chen and Nine Nether must have gained some strength over the year they had been gone, but when they left, Nine Nether was still only at the 6th grade, and Mu Chen was at 5th grade. A 1-grade increase in a year would be the limit, right? Even so, if they were to encounter Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder, there would be no chance of victory. At this moment, both Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder's gazes flickered slightly, but they said nothing further. A barely noticeable mocking curve appeared at the corners of their lips. Mu Chen and Nine Nether enjoyed considerable fame within the Great Luo Heaven Domain. If it were through conventional means, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder would likely have no way of recovering the situation from earlier. However, if these two individuals chose to confront them directly, it would be as if they were walking right into a humiliation. They were eager to see what would happen when these two bold rookies, who feared no tiger, were crushed at their hands. How much would their reputation still stand up to such a defeat? Mu King, Nine Nether King, competing for the throne is no easy task. You both must be cautious, the Heavenly Vulture Emperor said with a serious expression. Though he could sense the complex fluctuations of spiritual energy around Mu Chen and Nine Nether, from a reasonable perspective, he had never imagined that their power had risen to such a terrifying extent. Thank you for the warning, Heavenly Vulture Emperor, Mu Chen replied with a smile, though there was no sign that he would reconsider his decision. Seeing this, the Heavenly Vulture Emperor's eyes flickered with doubt. From Mu Chen's voice, he sensed a certain confidence. Based on his understanding of Mu Chen, though the latter was young, he was remarkably steady. If it weren't something almost certain, he wouldn't take such a risk. Did it mean that this guy had gained some powerful means to rival top-tier 9th-grade experts? Thinking about Mu Chen's trump cards, such as his Spiritual Array Master and Battle Formation Master skills, the Heavenly Vulture Emperor finally relaxed some of his concerns. He hoped that Mu Chen indeed had some confidence, or else risking humiliation in such an occasion would severely damage the Nine Nether Palace's reputation. Since you two are so determined, I'll have to bully the young this time. The Withered Elder, whose body was thin and frail, let out a hoarse laugh. In the next instant, he flashed and appeared on a massive stone platform in the square. His eyes filled with mockery as he looked up at the two in the sky. Let me see which of you will challenge me. If I lose, I'll never touch the throne of the new emperor. Countless gazes in the square immediately turned toward Mu Chen and Nine Nether. Some were filled with expectation, others with doubt, and there were also a few who took pleasure in their misfortune. I've long heard of the Withered Elder's great name. Let me have the honor of learning from you today, Nine Nether said with a smile, her slender figure appearing in front of the Withered Elder. In her eyes, it It seemed like flames were burning. It was a scorching battle intent. After 2 years of intense training in the Divine Sea space, aided by the immortal bird inheritance blood and guidance from the immortal bird beast sovereign, Nine Nether's power had advanced by leaps and bounds. Now, she was looking for an evenly matched opponent to test her growth, and the Withered Elder was clearly the perfect choice. The Withered Elder casually glanced at Nine Nether, then raised his brows slightly. As they drew closer, he finally noticed that Nine Nether's spiritual energy was deeply reined in, not leaking out in the slightest. "You're hiding your spiritual energy?" the Withered Elder asked, surprised. Nine Nether smiled brightly, not responding. She simply took a step forward, and in the next moment, the terrifying spiritual energy that had been suppressed within her body erupted like a volcano, instantly causing the heavens and earth to tremble. The vast spiritual energy surged, covering the sky and blocking the sun, while a powerful spiritual pressure erupted from within her. The square erupted in shocked gasps as countless gazes fixated on the slender, graceful figure, especially the Xun'er king and others, whose eyes seemed ready to pop out. The Heavenly Vulture Emperor and the Spirit Pupil Emperor couldn't help but change their expressions at this moment. They stared in disbelief at Nine Nether's figure and finally took a deep breath, murmuring in astonishment, She's also broken through to 9th Grade Supreme?" 9th Grade Supreme. The massive square was filled with shocked gazes fixed on Nine Nether's figure. Every expert found it hard to believe. Weren't the previous reports saying that Nine Nether King's strength was only at the 6th or 7th Grade Supreme level? How could she possibly be this strong now? The Xun'er King, Mountain-Splitting King, and the others were completely stunned. It was clear that they knew more about the Nine Nether King than anyone else. The last time they left, the Nine Nether's strength was still quite formidable among the kings, but she was at most ranked 3rd or 4th. Yet now, even the Xun'er King had yet to reach 9th Grade Supreme, so why had she already taken that step? Could it be that she used a secret technique to temporarily boost her power? Someone murmured with uncertainty. Impossible. Secret techniques to forcefully increase power would cause uncontrollable spiritual energy. But the spiritual energy that erupted from the Nine Nether King shows no signs of chaos. It clearly belongs to her. But how could she have improved so dramatically in less than a year? Whispers of disbelief spread through the crowd. Even the kings looked puzzled, but in the end, they could only shake their heads in confusion. Clearly, they had no idea what had happened during the near year that Nine Nether had been absent, which could explain such an extraordinary increase in her strength. Amidst the astonished gazes, the Withered Elder, who stood on the stone platform, was equally in disbelief. He stared at Nine Nether, but being a man of experience, he quickly composed himself. When he looked at her again, there was no longer any hint of disdain, only deep seriousness. From the terrifying spiritual energy erupting from Nine Nether, even he sensed the presence of danger. It was said that the Nine Nether King, who came from the Nine Nether Sparrow clan, possessed the physique of a divine beast and unmatched battle power. Even though both she and the Withered Elder had just stepped into 9th Grade Supreme, if they were to fight, the Withered Elder no longer had absolute confidence. At that moment, they finally understood why Chen had been so confident. The Nine Nether King had already reached 9th Grade Supreme. Such strength truly qualified her to compete for the title of new Emperor of the Great Luo Heaven Domain. "I was too blind before," the Withered Elder muttered. "Now, I shall witness the Nine Nether King's abilities for myself." He gave Nine Nether a deep, appraising glance. Then, his withered hand slowly clenched, and his murky eyes seemed to shine with a sudden intensity. Boom! As the final word left his mouth, an equally overwhelming surge of spiritual power exploded from his frail body. The energy was gray, and wherever it spread, even the ground beneath it began to wither. It was clear that the Withered Elder's spiritual power carried a unique strength. Anyone who had reached 9th grade and made a name for themselves in the Northern Domain was certainly not an ordinary person. The two immense forces of spiritual energy collided in the air. Though no one had moved yet, the sheer pressure in the air made many of the powerful warriors present feel a tingling on their skin. The Withered Elder's dull eyes suddenly sharpened with piercing brilliance. In an instant, he stepped forward, and a vast wave of spiritual energy surged. The energy transformed into countless gray streaks of light, crashing down like a rainstorm. Flooding toward Nine Nether, the gray light rays were tainted with a sense of decay, and wherever they passed, it seemed as if the very space around them was beginning to decay. That's the Withered Elder's withering and flourishing spiritual power. If struck, the body will immediately wither, and even the spiritual energy within would be corrupted, leading to decay. The powerful warriors in the square all looked at the gray rays with fear in their eyes. Even a slight touch from the rays could cause grave injury. If the withered elder had aimed his attack at them, they would have been instantly overwhelmed, leaving behind countless decayed bodies. But under the fearful gazes of the crowd, Nether remained calm. She simply gave the overwhelming attack a glance, then extended her slender, jade-like hand and pressed down from the air. Boom! A massive surge of spiritual energy erupted like a towering ocean wave. The energy released an intense heat, and as it boiled, even the air itself seemed to catch fire. Sizzle! The two immense spiritual forces collided, but to everyone's surprise, there was no deafening explosion. Instead, the two powerful forces constantly eroded each other, leaving behind dark fissures in space where they met. The gray light rays, like meteors, came crashing down from all directions. Yet no matter how thick the decaying aura, they couldn't come within 1,000 meters of Nether. Although the spiritual power of the withered elder seemed strange, the Nether was by no means ordinary. Under the guidance of the immortal Phoenix Beast Sovereign, she had cultivated the true undying flame, which brought about a great transformation in her own spiritual power. The undying flame inherently contained the power of life and death. In some respects, it was even more domineering than the so-called withering spiritual power of the withered elder. While the latter's spiritual power could erode other strong beings, it was clearly impossible for it to contaminate the spiritual power of Nether. On the square, many powerful beings observed with growing tension as the withered elder's assaults, no matter how fierce, failed to breach Nether's 1,000-jong range. Withered old man, if these are your only methods, then I'm afraid the position of new emperor will be very hard to secure today, Nether said with a smile from the stone platform. Although the withered elder's offensive appeared grand, it was mostly a test. The withered elder's gaze grew stern, and he slowly nodded. His dry hands suddenly formed a seal. In an instant, vast spiritual power swirled like a tornado, and a massive spiritual energy illusion appeared behind him. The spiritual energy shadow was highly peculiar. It had a human shape but grew branches and leaves. From a distance, it resembled an ancient tree swaying in the wind, though this tree emitted a thick aura of withering, causing the surrounding spiritual power to rapidly diminish. That's the supreme Dharma body the withered elder has cultivated, the withering and flourishing Dharma body. The many powerful beings saw the towering ancient tree behind the withered elder, and their eyes twitched. Low gasps spread throughout the crowd. The withering and flourishing Dharma body that the withered elder cultivated was quite mysterious. It ranked 61st on the list of 99 supreme Dharma bodies. To cultivate such a body, one must absorb the many forces of withering from the world. And the withered elder had spent many years in the boundless wasteland before finally refining this body. This Dharma body was capable of unleashing withering force with every movement, and if it entered the body, it could even cause the flesh to wither and decay. It was incredibly domineering and sinister. Such a method was typically the withered elder's trump card. However, no one expected that just after starting to fight with Nether, the withered elder would immediately summon it. Clearly, after his earlier probing, he had realized that ordinary tactics were ineffective against Nether. The withered elder's body slowly rose and landed atop the towering ancient tree. He gazed down at Nether and croaked. If the Nether king can withstand my withering power, I will admit defeat. Nether tilted her delicate face upward, her beautiful eyes locked on the ancient tree. She felt the sinister withering energy, but remained unfazed. Instead, she smiled and said, if the withered elder's withering Dharma body can break my fire shield, I too will admit defeat. As her voice fell, overwhelming spiritual power gathered above Nether. It transformed into a massive black giant bird, its wings spreading to obscure the sky. That moment, the giant bird let out a clear, long cry. Its massive beak opened, and rolling flames erupted from it. The flames were transparent, creating an incredibly strange sight. Immortal fire shield, Nether whispered softly in her mind. The flames immediately surged out, twisting the space around them. It then formed into a towering fire shield, enveloping the withering Dharma body. Boom! The transparent fire shield descended. The withered elder's old face trembled. The Nether king is overly confident. A mere fire shield, and you think you can trap me? He sneered inwardly. But his expression soon turned serious. He began to rapidly change his hand seals. The ancient tree beneath his feet began to shake, and countless gray lights surged out, sweeping across the heavens and earth. Withering Willow Hand. Thousands of gray lights condensed and transformed into a massive gray hand. The hand appeared withered, releasing a withering aura that dimmed the sky. The numerous powerful beings watching this felt their scalps tingle. They recognized it immediately. This was the Withered Elder's signature move. Such an ominous attack, if it struck, could cause even an 8th grade Supreme to wither and die on the spot. Clearly, although the Withered Elder appeared defiant, he harbored immense caution toward Nine Nether, fearing that one wrong move might cause his downfall. Boom! The giant hand swept through the sky. It seemed weightless. Yet the force it contained was enough to instill fear in countless powerful beings present. The giant hand charged toward the flame barrier, and suddenly, ripples appeared above it. The flames swirled. Then transparent flames burst out, colliding directly with the withered hand. Boom! Upon impact, the terrifying heat spread, and the Withered Elder's expression changed. Drastically, as if his withered hand had encountered its natural nemesis. The transparent flames swept across, and the withered hand began to burn like dry wood. Such domineering flames. On the square, countless powerful beings also twitched their faces in shock. Both the Heavenly Vulture Emperor and the Spirit Pupil Emperor. S gazes sharpened, feeling an intense danger from those transparent flames. Is this truly the undying flame? The Withered Elder's eyes were wide in horror as he stared at the transparent flames, his voice growing sharp. His cultivation, the withering and flourishing Dharma body, focused on withering power. A sinister and evil force that was deeply afraid of the most young and rigid power. This undying flame was its natural counter because no matter how much his withering power eroded, it could never extinguish the eternal vitality of the undying flame. 9 Nether smiled as she observed the Withered Elder's drastic change in expression. This immortal fire shield was taught to her by the immortal Phoenix Beast Sovereign, and while it couldn't severely damage the Withered Elder, it could definitely trap him. Withered Elder, you can continue to try, 9 Nether said. The Withered Elder's face alternated between green and white, before he bitterly smiled and shook his head. 9 Nether King truly is extraordinary. This time, I admit defeat. The square erupted in whispers. No one expected the Withered Elder to surrender so easily. However, only he knew that the fire barrier was particularly restraining to him. Although he could forcibly break the formation with all his might, it would consume a lot of time and give 9 Nether the chance to take advantage. Therefore, even if he broke through, the outcome would still be uncertain. In that case, it was better to surrender than to waste effort. Thank you. 9 Nether smiled slightly, raising her jade hand. The massive fire barrier turned into transparent flames, rolling back and being absorbed into her delicate mouth. The temperature of the world quickly returned to normal. The Withered Elder leapt off the stone platform and landed beside the cold-faced Dragon Arm Supreme. He glanced at him and whispered, "This 9 Nether King is not simple. I believe the Mu King is not as easy to deal with as he seems. Just some trickery." Dragon Arm Supreme's eyes gleamed, and he shot a cold glance at the smiling Mu Chen in the distance. He muttered under his breath, then turned to the Withered Elder with a cold voice. 9 Nether may be a divine beast with the undying flame, which makes her difficult to deal with, but I don't believe that Mu Chen, who is also human, can possess strength rivaling that of a 9th grade Supreme in just 1 year. As he finished speaking, he snorted coldly, stomped his foot, and his body flashed to a large stone platform. His tiger-like eyes glinted as they locked onto Mu Chen, and his indifferent voice echoed, "Mu King, if you want to take the new emperor position from me, let me see if you have the ability to do so."